They say every American family wants the picture-perfect life, with the white picket fence, the shiny SUV in the driveway, and the carefully curated baby shower with pastel balloons bought from Target. I believed I was living that dream, or at least a Walmart version of it. My wife, Jennifer, smiled like the commercials where mothers pull fresh-baked cookies out of ovens, and our neighbors in suburban Ohio believed we were the embodiment of wholesome family values. They saw us at the 4th of July barbecue holding hands and assumed we were rock solid. But what the neighborhood never saw was Jennifer keeping her phone on silent, flipping its screen down, faster than a politician dodging questions about campaign funds. What they never saw was her lingering trips to yoga class that somehow lasted longer than an NFL overtime game. And what I never saw, but should have, was the writing on the wall that screamed, "You are about to be the starring fool in America's next big cheating wife conspiracy." The story was supposed to be simple. Boy meets girl, they fall in love, they buy a house they cannot afford but pretend they can, and eventually they bring a child into the world, uniting both sides of the family under one roof of expectations. My father-in-law, Harold, was the kind of man who treated family honor like it was stock on the New York Exchange. To him, the birth of a grandchild was not about diapers or lullabies. It was about legacy, continuation, and the American dream living on through bloodline. He looked me straight in the eyes months before the due date and said, "You better protect my daughter and that baby, because our family name means everything." Gent. The irony is that Harold had no idea the family name was about to be turned into a punchline worthy of late-night television. Jennifer, in the months leading up to delivery, was a mystery novel written by someone high on caffeine and secrets. She smiled more than usual, but it was not the smile of a devoted wife. It was the smile of someone who knew the ending of a story and was just waiting for the audience to catch up. Meanwhile, I was caught up in Pinterest boards for nursery designs and the Amazon addiction of buying baby gadgets that no human actually needs. I thought I was preparing for fatherhood. In reality, I was preparing to be the unwitting clown of a grand betrayal. Here is where the conspiracy threads start weaving themselves into reality. Jennifer's sudden cravings for soul food in the middle of the night. Her endless fascination with hip-hop documentaries on Netflix, even though last year she swore she hated rap. The way she flinched when my father-in-law joked at Thanksgiving, "This baby better come out with blonde hair like mine." Looking back, it feels like foreshadowing in a badly written sitcom where the laugh track is broken. But in the moment, I shrugged it all off, telling myself, "Pregnancy hormones, man. She is just being quirky." The betrayal was already in motion. Somewhere, while I worked late at the office or fell asleep watching ESPN, she was crafting a double life, rehearsing her part in an infidelity story so dramatic that even reality TV producers would reject it for being too cliché. A cheating wife carrying a baby that was never mine, playing the role of loving spouse in front of church friends and community barbecues. If this was parody, I was the butt of the joke. If it was conspiracy, I was the guy who ignored all the signs until the revelation hit like a nuclear strike. Harold, my father-in-law, had big plans for the baby. He already ordered a tiny baseball glove, convinced his future grandson would play in the major leagues, preferably for the Yankees, because real men do not root for small-market teams. He boasted to his golf buddies that his daughter married a good man and their family tree was about to bloom into greatness. In every family cookout, he raised a beer and toasted to the future of our bloodline. He believed, with all the arrogance of a man who never faced betrayal, that nothing could crack the image of his perfect family. He had no idea his daughter was living in an infidelity subplot more tangled than a soap opera. And me? I kept playing the part of the proud father-to-be. I decorated the nursery with cartoon giraffes, hung up alphabet posters, and assembled a crib that nearly broke my marriage before the cheating even came to light. Jennifer clapped her hands and told me I was such a good dad already. Meanwhile, her phone buzzed constantly in the kitchen drawer, And I never once asked who was texting her at midnight. I wanted to believe in the purity of our love story, not in the conspiracy that was slowly unfolding beneath my nose. The hospital day approached, and with it came the grand finale of this tragic comedy. The family gathered in anticipation, Harold in the waiting room wearing his world's best grandpa cap that he bought prematurely from Walmart. He bragged to the nurses about his family heritage, about how strong German stock never fails, about how this baby would carry on the family line with pride. And me? I paced the floor like a man about to win the lottery, not knowing the ticket I held was counterfeit. When the labor pains started, Jennifer squeezed my hand so hard I thought she was punishing me for crimes I had not yet committed. Maybe she was punishing me for being gullible. Maybe she was punishing me for trusting. Hours passed, sweat poured, doctors shouted instructions, and then the cry of new life filled the sterile air. My heart swelled. I thought, this is the moment every American man dreams of, the moment family begins. But then I looked, and what I saw was not blonde hair, not blue eyes, not even the vague features of my own face. What I saw was undeniable truth carved into the skin of a child who was not mine. The baby was black. The room went silent. Nurses froze. My father-in-law, peeking in with a proud grin, dropped his jaw so hard it nearly cracked the hospital tiles. Jennifer whispered something about recessive genes, about family history we did not know, about it happens sometimes. But even in that moment, even in the chaos, I knew the truth. This was not genetics. This was betrayal. This was infidelity delivered in human form, a living, breathing reminder of a cheating wife's lies. And yet, before I could scream, before I could collapse, before Harold could explode with fury, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe this was fate's twisted idea of comedy. Maybe the American dream is just one big parody, and I was cast as the fool. Silence has a sound in an American hospital. It is the hum of fluorescent lights, the whisper of the air conditioner, the creak of polished shoes on linoleum when no one wants to be the first to speak a truth that will break a family. I felt that silence pressing on my chest, as if the ceiling itself had dropped 2 inches. The nurse at the foot of the bed stared at the wall clock as though time might reverse if she begged it long enough. Jennifer met my eyes with a wobbling smile I had never seen before, the kind of smile people wear when a magician asks for volunteers and they realize the trick involves a chainsaw. In the doorway, my father-in-law froze with his cap cocked to the side, the proud words stitched across it, suddenly ridiculous. This was the moment when the American sitcom cuts to a laugh track, except nobody laughed. The universe kept a straight face, and I understood that the scene was not a joke, but a revelation. The first word I spoke did not feel like my voice. I said, "Congratulations," and even I did not know who I was congratulating. Jennifer whispered something about family history, about recessive traits, about the mystery of genetics. It was not the content that bothered me. It was the tempo. She had these lines ready like a weather anchor with a teleprompter during hurricane season. Outside the window, the sky was violently blue in that American way, too cheerful for catastrophes. A newborn cried, tiny and insistent, as if announcing a verdict. This child had arrived, and with the arrival came the invoice for months of secrets, a bill stamped with the ink of betrayal, the ledger of infidelity written in bold type. My father-in-law moved first. He stepped fully into the room and removed his cap with a ceremonial slowness that belonged to another century. I had seen him do that at funerals and at the national anthem. He placed the cap on the windowsill with 2 trembling fingers and said my name like a warning. I answered like a defendant. He asked what we were looking at, and there was no answer that did not slice somebody. The obstetrician cleared his throat, said something neutral about healthy lungs and excellent APGAR scores, as if biology could mop the floor where morality had slipped and fallen. The nurse swaddled the child with compassionate efficiency. Somewhere in the hospital, a television reported a baseball score to no one in particular. America went on without us. When Harold spoke to his daughter, his voice did not crack. It rang like metal on metal. He asked her who the father was. He did not ask if there had been a mistake. He did not ask for more reassuring fairy tales about genes that jump fences like track stars. He asked for a name. Jennifer clung to the last plank of a sinking ship and insisted on mystery. I could have admired her commitment to fiction if the stakes were not my life. She said the words, "our baby," the way a magician says, abracadabra, hoping syllables alone would mask the mechanism. But even stage lights cannot hide the trapdoor once it has opened. My father-in-law took one step closer, and I watched the old man of speeches and golf jokes transform into something ancient and stern, a patriarch stripped to bone. The hospital offered a small room for difficult conversations, which is a polite phrase meaning a chamber where truth is supposed to sit down quietly. We shuffled in. Harold refused the chair. I took the chair for fear my legs would announce their resignation. Jennifer stood between us, a broker of impossible peace. The child was in the nursery now, watched by people who knew nothing of the storm clouds above the family name. I felt a strange tenderness for the baby, clean of our politics, innocent of our expectations. Then I remembered the midnight phone buzzes, the screen turned face down, the new playlists, the glances at Thanksgiving. Memory is cruel. It uses high definition when you wish for static. I told Jennifer that we would do a paternity test immediately. My voice surprised me again, steady and businesslike, as if I had been waiting at the counter for this transaction and the clerk finally called my number. She objected with an earnestness that might have sold a house. A test would be insulting, she said. A test would be unnecessary, she said. A test would be a stain on the beginning of a precious life, she said. Her arguments marched in neat formation, but each of them wore borrowed shoes. Harold cut through them as if they were smoke. He announced that there would be a test because truth did not care for our feelings, and the family name was not a coloring book where anyone could change shades at will. It sounded harsh, but I understood the impulse. He wanted to hold a line against chaos. He wanted the world to keep making sense on a field where rules had been broken by a cheating wife who thought consequences were an option to uncheck. Jennifer turned to me and pleaded. She spoke my name like a password. She reached for my hand, and I let her hold it, because I could not invent strength on demand. She said the words that had always melted me. Family, future, forever. Funny thing about those words, they are elastic until the day they snap. I asked her in the plainest language I could find whether she had been faithful. The room heard the question even if no one repeated it. She took a breath that seemed to last a year and said that love was complicated, that loneliness makes fools of all of us, that life had pushed her into an apology she did not know how to pronounce. I told her that love may be complicated, but infidelity is very simple. Either it happened or it did not. Betrayal does not need poetry. It needs a calendar and a door. Harold requested a nurse who arrived with kindness and protocol. Papers were discussed. A sample would be taken. Results would come later. Later suddenly felt like a hostile country where I did not speak the language. While forms were signed, my mind wandered to absurd places. I imagined a jury of wise ants in a church basement passing judgment with paper plates of potato salad on their knees. I imagined the neighborhood's group chat lighting up with emojis and allegations. I imagined the baby years from now, older and asking questions in a voice that might sound nothing like mine. The imagination is a poor architect for a house you must live in. Back in the delivery room, a new nurse handed me the child. My arms moved before my mind voted. The baby was warm and light and complete, the way all babies are, and the sight of tiny fingers curling into fists almost convinced me that the world could be remade by innocence alone. I felt a pang of something vastly inconvenient. It was not fatherhood, not yet. It was the raw awareness that a child does not commit betrayal, a child does not author infidelity, a child does not draft revenge. Adults do. The sins were ours, not his. I knew then that whatever verdict the test delivered, I would carry two truths for the rest of my life: the truth of harm done to me, and the truth of a life that did not ask to be a weapon. Harold saw me holding the baby and misread my face. He mistook tenderness for surrender. He told me with soldierly certainty that our family would not be mocked by lies, that a cheating wife would not write the anthem of our household, that the name he had defended for decades would not be dragged across headlines and bar stools. He promised lawyers. He promised judges. He promised that a paper trail would be built like a wall. In that speech I heard both his fury and his fear. His daughter had set fire to the reputation he worshipped, and he wanted to punish the flames for being bright. Jennifer, exhausted and radiant and terrified, asked to hold the baby and began to cry in a way that pulled nurses from the hallway. The tears were not theatrical. They were ancient. She confessed in pieces, like a building surrendering floor by floor. There was someone. It was brief. It was stupid. It was a moment of loneliness she had turned into a season of lying. She said the man did not matter. The man had never mattered. Those words hit the floor and broke, because the man mattered very much now. His shadow lay across the crib like a second blanket. Harold demanded a name again, and this time Jennifer gave one. It sounded like a drumbeat at a parade I had never attended. I repeated it to myself and felt the syllables install themselves in my memory against my will. I hated how ordinary the name was. I had hoped for a villain with a cinematic quality, someone I could defeat with a single gesture. Life refused the screenplay. There would be no duel at sunrise. There would be emails and lawyers and receipts and the slow administrative grind of a broken family. When Harold stormed out, he did not take his cap. He left it on the windowsill like a relic from a civilization that had ended at noon. I followed him to the corridor, and he told me, in that steady tone he reserved for threats and blessings, that I was not to be a fool. He said revenge would taste better if served with paperwork. He said betrayal demands witnesses. He told me he would pay for the best attorney in the state, and that the first motion would strip away illusions. He patted my shoulder with a hand that had steered golf carts and family gatherings and now wanted to steer my future. I thanked him because gratitude is what you hand people when you have nothing else to give. When I returned, Jennifer was asleep, the child beside her in a plastic bassinet, the monitors blinking their robotic lullaby. I sat in the chair with the weight of 2 centuries on my chest. My phone buzzed on the tray table. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was a single sentence that would make part 3 inevitable. We need to talk about what she promised me. I stared at the words until the lines on the phone blurred. In that moment, I understood that the conspiracy had a part 2 and a part 3, and that the credits would not roll for a long time. I also understood that revenge is not an act. It is a climate. It is a season you walk through, wearing a suit that never quite fits. I stood, walked to the window, and put Harold's cap back in my hands. The stitching said Grandpa. The mirror in the glass said Stranger. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed at a joke. Somewhere in the city, a siren negotiated with traffic. I placed the cap on the bassinet, a ridiculous gesture that felt like a treaty with the future, and whispered to the sleeping child words he could not possibly hear. I told him that I would find the truth, that betrayal would not write the last chapter for this family, that infidelity would not be the only story told about us. I told him I would not be the hero or the villain. I would be the witness. And then, without a plan but with a purpose, I opened my phone and replied to the stranger. Revelations do not end with confessions. They mutate. They grow legs and march through every room of a house, through every whispered conversation, through every mailbox stuffed with legal letters. By the time the DNA test confirmed what everyone already knew, the damage was not just personal. It was municipal. It was a betrayal loud enough to rattle the walls of our suburban neighborhood. The child was not mine. The child was evidence. The hospital report was stamped with numbers and percentages, but to Harold, my father-in-law, those digits were not scientific. They were artillery. The day we got the results, Harold showed up in his golf attire, as if betrayal could be negotiated between holes 9 and 10. He slammed the paper down on my dining room table with the force of a judge delivering a death sentence. Jennifer sat across from us, mascara streaking like battle paint, insisting there was still love in the family. Harold leaned forward and told her that love was irrelevant, that a cheating wife had detonated the family's reputation, and that no amount of romantic slogans could sweep ash off a burned house. He declared her guilty of infidelity with the solemnity of a man who had buried too many illusions. What followed was less family discussion and more congressional hearing. Harold interrogated his daughter, demanding dates, places, alibis. He asked about the man whose name already haunted me like graffiti on a sacred wall. Jennifer dodged, weaved, tried to paint the affair as a momentary lapse. Harold was not buying it. To him, every betrayal was a hostile takeover, every cheating wife the enemy of a bloodline. He announced that he was cutting her out of his will, that her betrayal had forfeited every privilege. He said our family tree had a diseased branch and it would be sawed off before it poisoned the roots. I wanted to scream at him, to remind him that I was the one married to her, that the betrayal was carved deepest in my skin, but the truth was, Harold's rage carried me. It gave me permission to be furious when I had been numb. It gave me an ally in revenge, a co-plaintiff in the case against infidelity. I watched him pace my living room like a general drafting strategy. He promised lawsuits, custody battles, restraining orders. He promised the cheating wife would not walk away laughing. He promised that betrayal, once proven, would be punished until the ledger balanced. The strange part? Jennifer tried to spin the narrative as if we were all in this together. She sobbed about family unity, about forgiveness, about starting fresh. Her words dripped with desperation, but her timing was comedic in the darkest way. It was as if a burglar had been caught red-handed and immediately suggested we all just pretend the robbery was a game. The conspiracy theories began to swirl in my head. What if this man she had been with was not just some fling? What if there was a bigger story behind it, some plot that stretched beyond our street? My paranoia grew wings. I checked her phone records. I traced receipts. I found inconsistencies that could fill a courtroom wall. Harold encouraged it. He told me betrayal was never small, that infidelity was always the tip of an iceberg. He poured me whiskey and told me stories of colleagues ruined by cheating wives, of family friends who thought their marriages were safe until the DNA tests came back like subpoenas from fate. He painted our situation not as a tragedy, but as a case study, a chapter in the American textbook of betrayal. I drank and listened, half convinced he was right, half terrified that my life had become a parody of suburban manhood. The neighborhood caught on fast. Whispers spread faster than Amazon deliveries. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me in every aisle, as if shoppers had insider knowledge of my humiliation. At the gym, men nodded with the sympathy of veterans who had seen battle. Even the pastor delivered a sermon about trust and deception, his eyes drifting toward me more often than Scripture allowed. Our family was now public theater, betrayal performed on a stage, lit by gossip and speculation. Jennifer fought to reclaim dignity, showing up at church, posting smiling pictures on social media, insisting the family was intact. But Harold sabotaged her campaign. He told anyone who would listen that his daughter was a liar, that his family legacy had been mocked by infidelity, that a cheating wife had dishonored his blood. He became the town crier of betrayal, ringing the bell of disgrace until every corner knew the sound. She hated him for it. She begged me to silence him. But I could not. His fury was my proxy, his revenge my soundtrack. At night I lay awake wondering if Harold's obsession was helping me or devouring me. He talked of lawyers while I dreamed of baseball games I would never play with the boy. He drafted legal strategies while I replayed the sound of Jennifer saying the other man's name. Revenge is intoxicating, but like whiskey, it burns the throat on the way down. Sometimes I wondered if Harold wanted revenge more than I wanted healing. Sometimes I wondered if I was just another soldier in his war against betrayal. The breaking point came at a family dinner we staged for appearances. Jennifer tried to cook meatloaf, pretending we were normal again. Harold brought the DNA papers and placed them next to the salt shaker like a centerpiece. He read them aloud between bites of potatoes. The words were clinical, but his delivery was Shakespearean. Jennifer finally snapped, screaming that she was still his daughter, that family meant forgiveness. Harold stood, slammed his fist on the table, and declared, "Family does not mean shielding a cheating wife from consequences." Plates shattered. The baby cried in the next room. I sat frozen, realizing that betrayal had not only destroyed a marriage, but had declared war on blood itself. That night, Harold made me promise that I would not cave, that I would not let pity rewrite the narrative. He told me I had a duty to the truth, to revenge, to the family name. He told me betrayal could not be forgiven without turning every man in our line into a fool. He said infidelity must be answered like a crime, with proof and punishment. He told me he would see this through, even if I did not. I nodded because nodding was easier than arguing. But in my chest I felt a new conspiracy forming, one in which Harold's revenge might consume us all. The message from the stranger still haunted me. We need to talk about what she promised me. It suggested layers, debts, secrets. If Harold was the judge and Jennifer the guilty, then this stranger was the witness waiting to testify. I knew I would have to meet him. I knew the story was not done. Betrayal had chapters left to write, and I was trapped between the author and the audience, waiting for the next line to land like a hammer. After the dinner table war, after the DNA verdict, after the screaming and broken plates, you would think the story had reached its climax. But betrayal is not a movie that fades to black at the kiss of justice. Betrayal is a stubborn parasite. It lingers. It breeds conspiracy theories. It mutates into versions of revenge you never thought yourself capable of. I thought the worst had already happened, that I had seen the full face of my cheating wife, that Harold's fury had burned the family name clean. But I was wrong. The revelation had just begun. The message from the stranger festered in my pocket like a live grenade. We need to talk about what she promised me. I stared at it for days, imagining what kind of man would type that. Was he the father? Was he just another notch in Jennifer's belt of infidelity? Or was he something more sinister? A figure in a grander conspiracy, someone who had used her betrayal as leverage for his own game. Harold urged me to call the number, but Harold urged a lot of things. Sue her, sue him, sue the hospital for even allowing this humiliation to occur. His thirst for revenge was biblical, but this message was mine to answer. I arranged to meet the stranger in a diner off the interstate, the kind of place where coffee is bottomless and dreams are refilled until they are too bitter to swallow. He was younger than I expected, wearing a cheap suit like it was borrowed from a cousin. He introduced himself with a name that meant nothing to me, a name that landed flat but heavy. He told me Jennifer had promised him money, promised him escape, promised him that the baby would never be acknowledged by me or my family. He claimed she had spun him the same web of loyalty she once spun me. And then she abandoned him, too. Betrayal, it turned out, was her only consistent talent. The man slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, text messages, receipts, evidence of a relationship that went beyond a fling, that had been woven into the fabric of my supposed family life for months. I saw her handwriting on notes, her smile in selfies, her laugh immortalized in audio clips. It was a parallel marriage, and I had been the stand-in husband, the decoy. My coffee turned cold as I realized how deep the infidelity ran. This was not a single betrayal. It was a full-blown conspiracy staged inside my own home. Harold nearly celebrated when I brought him the evidence. He waved it like a flag, declaring victory. To him, every receipt was a bullet, every photo a courtroom exhibit. He contacted a lawyer that night, beginning the paperwork that would strip Jennifer of custody, of inheritance, of dignity. His crusade was merciless. He was not satisfied with revenge. He wanted annihilation. The betrayal of his bloodline had to be punished until no one dared repeat it. He drafted affidavits like scripture, and every word reeked of vengeance. Jennifer broke down in the weeks that followed. She called, she begged, she appeared on the porch with tears that might have moved a saint but no longer touched me. She spoke of family, of love, of forgiveness. I told her forgiveness was a language I had unlearned. I told her betrayal had burned the dictionary. She accused me of cruelty, but cruelty was a tame word compared to infidelity. She accused Harold of tyranny, but tyranny was gentler than betrayal. The neighborhood watched like it was a soap opera. At the grocery store, people whispered about the cheating wife who had given birth to a baby that exposed her lies. At church, women shook their heads and prayed for the child. At work, men clapped me on the shoulder with the camaraderie of soldiers who had survived ambush. America loves a scandal, and ours had become entertainment. We were the talk show nobody turned off. In the middle of it all, the baby remained. Innocent, untouched by conspiracy theories or legal jargon. I would hold him in the quiet of night, listening to his small breaths, and feel a tug of war inside me. He was not mine, but he was here. He was proof of infidelity, but also proof of life. Revenge wanted me to reject him. Family wanted me to protect him. Betrayal whispered that I was a fool for even hesitating. And yet, as his tiny hand closed around my finger, I realized I was bound to him in ways Harold could never understand. Blood might not tie us, but fate had stapled us together. The final confrontation came not in a courtroom, but in my living room. Jennifer arrived uninvited. Harold stormed in behind her, and the stranger from the diner appeared with demands of his own. 3 voices collided in a storm of accusation. Jennifer cried betrayal. Harold shouted betrayal. The stranger listed debts like betrayal was a currency. I stood in the middle, the only one who had not betrayed, but the one who carried the heaviest weight. I realized then that betrayal is not a single event. It is a cycle, and someone has to break it. I told them all to leave. I told Jennifer she was no longer my wife. I told Harold his revenge was his own, not mine. I told the stranger that promises made by a cheating wife were as empty as confetti after a parade. And when the house was finally silent, I held the baby again, the innocent in a story of infidelity and revenge, and I whispered that his future would not be written by our sins. The paperwork went through. The divorce was finalized. Harold disowned his daughter. Jennifer vanished into the fog of scandal, and the stranger disappeared with his receipts. But I remained with a child who was not mine, but who looked at me as if I were the only safe harbor in a storm. Betrayal had ended one chapter, but it had written me into another. Revenge no longer burned in my chest. What burned was resolve. The resolve that a cheating wife would not define me, that infidelity would not be my legacy, that family could be built even out of ruins. America loves a good story, especially one about betrayal and revenge. Neighbors still talk, still speculate, still weave conspiracy theories about the cheating wife and the black baby that turned a suburban dream into a headline. Let them talk. Let them write their own endings. I have mine. And it begins with a child who will never know the word betrayal the way I did, because I will not teach him.